Amaka was the only child of a very rich family. Her father owned companies in many countries. Her mother had shops, land, and houses in different cities. From the day she was born, money was never a problem. She never took public transport. She never wore clothes from the market. She flew first class to school in another country. Her birthday parties made the news. There were always expensive cars parked in front of her house. Every corner of her life smelled of money. But even with all this, Amaka was not proud. She smiled at everyone, greeted her elders, and gave to the poor. Still, many people stayed close to her only because of what she had. She had friends, but most were not real. Some followed her because they wanted favors. Others were only there to enjoy her money. She knew this, but she tried to stay kind. Then came the men with sweet words, men who claimed they loved her. But the moment she looked closely, she saw their eyes were not on her. They were on her father's houses, on her mother's business, on her family's wealth. Her parents noticed it too. They were worried. They didn't want her to marry someone who was only after money. Her father said one evening, "You will carry our name. You will carry everything we worked for. We want you to be with a man who loves you, not our riches." Her mother agreed. She told her, "Look carefully, my daughter. Gold attracts many hands, but not all hands are clean." And so Amaka waited. She prayed. She hoped for just one man who would love her for her heart, not her bank account. One Sunday afternoon, Amaka met a man named Jide. He was simple. No flashy car, no gold chain, just a neat shirt and clean shoes. He spoke gently and smiled often. He helped her carry her shopping bags that day, and from there, they started talking. Jide didn't ask her about her father's money. He didn't talk about her mansion or cars. He asked her about her dreams, her fears, her childhood. Amaka liked that. She felt seen. They started spending time together. Jide would take her to quiet places. He would sit with her for hours and just listen. He told her she was special, that her heart was beautiful, that her money didn't matter to him. Amaka felt safe. For the first time, she believed someone truly cared for her. She told her parents about Jide. Her father looked at her, then looked away. Her mother didn't say much, but the next morning she sat beside Amaka and said something simple. Love is not what a man says, it's what he does when you have nothing. Amaka heard the words, but her heart wanted to trust Jide. Maybe, just maybe, he was the one. One evening, as Amaka sat in the garden with her mother, the question came again. "Are you sure Jide loves you, my daughter?" Amaka looked down. She was quiet. Her mother touched her hand and said something Amaka did not expect. There is only one way to know. Fake being crippled. If he stays, he loves you. If he runs, now you know. Amaka was shocked. Her heart jumped. "How can I pretend to be crippled?" she asked. Her mother said, "Love must be tested. Let him carry you when you cannot walk. Let him feed you when your hands are tired. Let him see you weak. If he stays, then his love is real." Amaka could not sleep that night. She thought about Jide's words, his smile, his promises. But still, a small voice in her heart whispered, "What if he's lying?" The wedding was only 3 months away. The date was fixed. The guests were invited. But before she said yes forever, she wanted to be sure. So she agreed to the plan. She would fake the pain. She would use the wheelchair. She would become the woman who could no longer walk, just for a short time, long enough to see Jide's true heart. Amaka told her driver to help with the plan. They made it look real. One evening, news went around that Amaka had been in a car accident. People rushed to the hospital. Her legs were wrapped in bandages. She was placed in a wheelchair. The doctors, who were part of the plan, said she needed rest and time. Jide came running. He looked worried. He held her hand and cried. He kissed her forehead and said he would never leave her. Amaka watched him closely. His words were sweet. His face looked sad. She wanted to believe him. He began helping her with everything. He pushed her wheelchair. He fed her when her hands felt weak. He sat beside her and read stories. He even cleaned her room sometimes. Amaka smiled inside. Maybe, she thought, this is true love. But after 2 weeks, something changed. Jide started looking tired. He didn't smile as much. He didn't talk like before. By the 3rd week, he came late in the day. Sometimes he would say he was stuck in traffic. Other times, he would say he was too busy. Amaka waited and waited. One night, he didn't come at all. The next day, when he showed up, he didn't bring flowers like he used to. He looked at his phone more than he looked at her face. He stopped holding her hand. Soon, he stopped helping her into bed. He let the maid do it. He said he had a headache. He said he had work. He said he needed rest. Amaka watched it all in silence. She saw the way he pulled back, the way his love started to fade. Day by day, his heart became far from hers. But she said nothing. She wanted to see how far he would go. Another week passed, and Amaka's parents decided it was time to take the plan one step further. They invited the family doctor to the house. He was a trusted man, one who had known Amaka since she was a child. He had agreed from the start to help with the test, knowing how much pain fake love could bring to a family as respected as theirs. On the day of the visit, the whole house was quiet. Amaka sat in her wheelchair, covered in a wrapper. Her face looked weak and her eyes stayed low. Jide sat beside her, pretending to be concerned, but there was something different about his posture. He no longer leaned close like before. His hands no longer rested on hers. He looked more like a visitor than a fiancé. The doctor came in, greeted everyone, and began to speak. His voice was calm, but his words were heavy. He said, "We've checked her again. We've tried every medicine. We've prayed, but I'm afraid she may never walk again." The room fell silent. Amaka's mother covered her face. Her father looked away. Jide, who had been tapping his foot impatiently, stopped and froze. His mouth stayed open for a second, then closed again. He did not ask any questions. He did not show anger or even sadness. He only nodded slowly and looked at the ground. He stood up after a while and said he needed to make a phone call outside. Nobody stopped him. That night, he came to visit Amaka again, but something was missing in his eyes. He sat down, scrolled through his phone, and didn't speak much. He said he had things on his mind, that he was tired. Amaka looked at him and stayed silent. She had nothing more to say. She had seen what she needed to see. But the story wasn't over. Later that night, Jide thought everyone was asleep. He stepped out of the guest room and went into the compound to make a call. He didn't know that Amaka, sitting quietly in her chair by the window, had not yet slept. She had wheeled herself close to the window earlier that evening. Something in her spirit had told her to wait and listen. And she heard him. His voice was low, but his words were clear. "This girl don't turn liability," he said. "She just stay sit down like bag of rice. No walk, no help, nothing." He laughed. "I for don't leave since, but her money still they flow. Now the money they hold me here, I no go lie." He paused for a while, then continued. "I they plan small, make I just collect small again before I bounce. Na poor man go love woman way no fit walk. Me, I still get future." Amaka's hands gripped the side of her chair. Her chest grew tight. Her breath slowed. She felt a pain deeper than anything she had ever known. It was not because she heard the words. It was because she had once believed they would never come from him. Tears rolled down her face, but she didn't wipe them. She just sat there in the dark, listening to every lie he told on that phone call. He was not the man he claimed to be. He was just like the others, hiding behind sweet words, hoping to climb into her father's house through her heart. She did not cry loud. She did not call his name. She did not shout. She only sat there and remembered her mother's voice. Love must be tested. Now she had her answer, and very soon, the whole world would know the truth. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Jide's true self began to show more. After the doctor's visit, he stopped pretending completely. His visits to the house became short and careless. Sometimes he would say he was going for meetings, but his clothes smelled of perfume when he returned. His phone never left his hand, and he smiled more at his screen than at the woman he once promised forever. Amaka watched everything in silence. The smile she used to wear faded from her lips. Her eyes no longer carried joy. She had become a stranger in her own story, but she never said a word. She only watched and waited. Jide began to do what greedy hearts do. He saw her weakness and used it. He took the keys to one of her cars and started moving around like the owner. He took her ATM card, the one she had once given him for emergencies, and used it to book hotels and buy clothes. He said nothing to her. He didn't ask. He didn't hide. He started going out late at night and coming back early in the morning. He would tell the gatekeeper that Madam was asleep and should not be disturbed. He would sneak in, looking tired, smelling like smoke and sweat and strange perfumes. Sometimes he wouldn't even come home at all. But one night, something worse happened, something that showed just how far Jide's heart had fallen. While Amaka was asleep in the apartment they once shared, Jide brought another woman into the house. He waited until the lights were off. He made sure the guards had changed shift. He parked the car quietly and led the woman in through the back door. He told her to stay quiet, but she laughed too loud. The sound echoed through the hall. Amaka heard it from her room. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. She only sat in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, Jide acted like nothing had happened. He wore fresh clothes, sprayed cologne, and waved goodbye as if he had done no wrong. Amaka only nodded and looked away. But she was not alone. Ngozi, her maid, had seen it all. A quiet girl with sharp eyes, Ngozi had served Amaka for years. She had been with the family through many seasons, and though she didn't speak unless spoken to, she saw more than anyone knew. That afternoon, when Jide was gone, Ngozi came into Amaka's room and knelt down beside her. She said, "Madame, I know you've seen things, but I must tell you what I've seen too." Ngozi told her everything. The hotel receipts she found in Jide's pockets, the girls she saw dropping from his car, the times he picked calls in the hallway and called Amaka names, the night she saw him steal from her drawer when he thought no one was looking. Each word cut Amaka like a knife. She held her chest. Her body shook. Her heart broke again and again. She remembered the beginning, the flowers, the words, the long walks under the moonlight. All lies. All part of a plan to reach her family's wealth. She cried that day, not because she was crippled, but because love, the one thing she had always wanted, had become her deepest pain. She cried until no more tears came. Then she wiped her face, looked at Ngozi, and said only one word: enough. From that day she stopped waiting. She started planning. A lion does not roar before it strikes. A bird does not sing when the hunter is near. Amaka became quiet like water, but inside her a storm was forming. She would not shout. She would not beg. She would not even warn him. She would show him clearly, boldly, before the eyes of many, that a person can be rich in money and poor in truth, but only those with pure hearts ever truly win. The day of the wedding introduction arrived. The sun rose slowly, as if even the sky knew something great was about to happen. In the village, when a daughter of wealth prepares to wed, the earth feels it. The compound was filled with people, family, friends, elders, neighbors. Even those who barely knew the family came to witness history. The musicians were already setting up. The cooks were stirring large pots. Banners with both names stretched across the gate. Chairs were placed in rows, covered in white cloth, tied with golden ribbon. The smell of fried meat and pepper soup filled the air. Jide came with his people. He wore a rich agbada, shoes that shined like mirrors, and a smile that stretched too wide. He greeted everyone like a prince. He laughed loudly. He danced. He shook hands with chiefs and elders like he was already one of them. He believed that his plan had worked. He had entered the house of riches, and the door was about to be locked behind him. Inside the main hall, Amaka sat in her wheelchair. Her gown was beautiful, but her face was calm. Her mother stood beside her. Her father sat with the elders, his walking stick resting on his lap. Ngozi, the maid, stood quietly in the corner, watching everything. The time came for the introductions. The two families sat across each other. The spokespersons began to speak. They exchanged greetings. They praised the ancestors. They mentioned the bride and the groom. Gifts were brought in, boxes tied with lace, bowls filled with cola nuts, drinks wrapped in fine wrappers. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The master of ceremony asked for the bride to be brought in properly. Amaka's mother stepped forward, held her daughter's hand and said, "Let us rise." Gasps filled the room. Slowly, Amaka stood up. The wrapper around her legs dropped to the floor. She took one step, then another. Then she walked straight to the center of the room, in full view of everyone. The hall went quiet. The only sound was the sharp beating of hearts and the soft creak of wooden chairs as people leaned forward. Jide's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at her, then looked around. His hands began to shake. His smile vanished. His lips turned dry. His legs felt weak. What he thought was a dream was turning into dust before his eyes. Amaka raised her hand and spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, but every word carried the weight of truth. "I am not crippled," she said. "I never was. I only wanted to know if this man truly loved me." She turned to face Jide. "I gave you kindness. I gave you trust. I watched you fall in love, not with me, but with my money. I heard your calls. I saw the lies. I stayed quiet, but not blind." She faced the crowd. "This man used my money for women. He called me a burden. He said he was only here for what he could take. He laughed behind my back. He brought shame to my name." Elders shifted in their seats. Some shook their heads. Others whispered. She lifted her chin. "There will be no wedding today. This man will not carry my name. He will not sit at my father's table, and he will never touch one kobo of my family's wealth." She turned to her father and bowed slightly. "My eyes have seen, my heart has learned. Thank you for the wisdom you passed down." The father nodded, silent but proud. Jide tried to speak. He reached forward. "Amaka, please." But Amaka did not look at him again. The guards at the gate were called. Quietly, with no noise, Jide and his people were asked to leave. Some walked out with their heads down. Others whispered as they went. The music stopped. The dancers paused. The celebration ended, but a greater story had begun. In that moment, Amaka showed the whole world that wealth without wisdom is a weak foundation, that love without truth is a mask that will always fall. Jide stood there for a few seconds, frozen in shame. He looked around, hoping someone would speak for him, hoping for one hand to stop what was already happening. But no one moved. No one came forward. Even the friends he brought along looked away from him. When the guards approached, he stepped back. His voice was low, weak, trying to explain things that could no longer be explained. The guards did not touch him. They only pointed toward the gate. And without another word, Jide turned and walked out. As he reached the car, he looked for the girl he had brought with him earlier, the one he had whispered to, laughed with, made plans with. But she was gone. She had left when the truth came out, just like a leaf that floats with the wind but disappears the moment the wind dies. Jide entered the car alone. He did not look back. He did not wave. And just like that, the doors of Amaka's world closed behind him. Inside the hall, there was silence for a while. Then Amaka's father stood up slowly, walked toward her, and wrapped his arms around her. In that embrace was pride. in that embrace was a father's joy, not because his daughter was almost married, but because she had shown strength and wisdom far beyond her years. He whispered to her, "You have your mother's wisdom." Amaka rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. She did not cry. Her heart was calm. The storm had passed. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the chairs were being packed, Amaka sat under the mango tree behind the house. Ngozi brought her water and sat beside her. They didn't say much. They just looked at the sky. In her heart, Amaka made a promise. She would never again rush love. She would take her time. She would guard her heart, not with fear, but with wisdom. She now knew that love is not always loud, that sometimes love pretends until it's tested. And as the sky turned from gold to gray, the voice of the story whispered one last truth. Not every smile means love. Not every sweet word carries truth. And sometimes the richest heart is not the one filled with gold, but the one that has been broken and healed. Love is not always loud. It does not always come with big words or bright smiles. Sometimes love hides behind small actions, behind the way someone waits, behind the way someone stays when things go wrong. If someone truly loves you, they will love you in your weakness, not just your strength. When you can give nothing, when your hands are empty and your voice is low, real love still stands beside you. Real love does not run when things get hard. It does not count what it can gain. It gives, it stays. Amaka's story teaches us that trust must have roots and love must have truth. Without these, it will fall, no matter how beautiful it looks on the outside. Now let me ask you, do you think what Amaka did was right? Would you test your partner like that? Let's talk in the comments. And if you want more powerful African folk tales that carry wisdom and truth, don't forget to subscribe. Another story is coming soon, one that may touch your heart even deeper.